Okay, let me get started with how to use Photoshop briefly. Again, once you open the application, you'll see it gets a little overwhelming, and I'm going to go to the default workspace here. Um, Usually they have different workspaces. You have a 3D workspace, you have a motion workspace, you have a painting workspace. They're underneath Windows and Arrange and Workspace here. Essentials is from the book, I believe, and then New CS6 workspace. I tend not to like the New CS6 workspace because I'm just not used to it yet. You'll notice everything's in kind of these little boxes over here, and you have to click on them to open them, click on them to open them, click on to open them. Again, there is an option over here for Essentials here. There's a bunch of pop-up menus, and if you don't see the one that he's talking about in the book, you can always go under Windows and you can use them. So if you wanted the Layers window, I can go under Window, Layers, and it should pop up. Now, if you have multiple windows that you want to stack together, like a lot of times I use the paragraph window and the character window together. If they're separate like this, you can easily combine them together by clicking the word, like let's say the word character right here, and dragging it over top of the word paragraph here. You'll notice it kind of turns blue, and you let your mouse go and they'll be together. You can have them floating, or if they're jammed together over here, you can have them what they call tabbed together over here. If you want them to be floating, you can just drag them out and they can be floating. So some people don't like them floating and they have them all jammed over there. Some people like them floating. It's up to you how that you use the menus. Again, a lot of what we do is to open a file, we use what we call browse and bridge. And once you browse and bridge, you can then go and look at your files. Once you look at your files, you can then open them up. Usually, as long as your computer's configured properly, you can just double click on a picture and it'll actually open up. Some of the things you'll notice at first, and I just want to talk briefly about some of the things you'll notice at first, is one of them is the zoom factor right now. Whenever I'm looking at an image that is at 16.7% right now, I'm looking at the picture zoomed out. What does zoom out mean? Well, it means that Photoshop has shrunk the photo down so that the image kind of fits in your screen. I tend to, once we open a picture up in Photoshop, if you wanted to see exactly what the photo will look like, if you zoom in, now he's already changed some of the settings, but I still use Command plus to zoom here. When you're looking at it at 100%, that is usually what it would look like when it's like on a web page, or that's where the pixels that are inside of Photoshop are kind of matching the resolution in your monitor. So if you're looking at 100%, that's sort of what. So be aware there is a zoom factor when you're working inside of Photoshop, and what you're looking at is not necessarily the output of what will be outputted in the Photoshop program. Again, there's a lot of menu items that go all the way across the top. Some of them are highlighted and some of them are not. The reason why some of them are not highlighted might be because you don't have something selected. Like, I don't get a lot of these options because I don't have something selected. Another feature that is common is that it's when you open an image up for the first time, it's called background right here, and it's locked. Okay, that's just the way Photoshop works. It has a background image that is locked. That just keeps it from making mistakes, we'll say. I'm not really sure why they do that. To unlock the image in the layers window, this is called the layers window that shows you the layers, you can just double click on it and it'll turn it into a normal layer that is not locked. So some options you won't be able to have because maybe it's locked. So just be aware of that. Other times, if you're working inside the program, let's say I grab something and then I use my my move tool, which I use a lot. So I just use the rectangle selection tool and drew a box, and then I'm going to go to what's called the move tool, which is the first one, and there's some transform tools for that. So I'm going to transform that box, and basically I'm going to make this box bigger. I'm going to use the transform tools with the move tool, and I'm going to make it bigger. And once I do that and I start trying to do something, you'll say, oh, look, they're all grayed out. Why are they all grayed out? Well, it's waiting for you to actually do something with this thing that you just made big. You could either undo it by hitting the escape key, and now, oh, see, some of the options are not grayed out. But if you, again, I'm just doing this to show you why maybe some of the things are gray. If I, again, make it big like that, and then I go up here, and now, oh, they're all grayed out, they're all grayed out. And the reason why is it's asking you to do something with this. And if you want it to take the effect, sometimes you can hit the return key, but most of the time I just go over here and click the move tool again and say, do you want to apply this transformation? If I hit apply, and now, oh, they're all kind of back to normal again. So again, be aware that you might have some things kind of grayed out and it's asking you to do something. That's a common thing that happens when you're using the program. Again, I talked about moving the windows around, opening a file. Let me close this. If I hit the little X right here, and when I have a file open, if I hit the little X right here, it's going to try and close it. And then you say, oh, yes, I want to close it, or no, I don't want to close it. If I say yes, don't save, because I don't want it to save, it'll close it without saving it. Let me open up two files. So we have two of them open for an example here. So how can I open up two files? If I just went under, instead of using bridge this time, I went under file open. You can use file open instead of going to bridge. If you go under file open, I can go to my folder and I'm going to choose, let me choose two JPEGs here, and I'm going to open those up. If you open up two files at the same time, what it usually does is it does what's called tabbing them. You'll notice right here you got one here and one here, one here and one here. Now, some of the things it says in the book will be to use the arrange, and then it says two horizontal or two vertical. So that's underneath window, arrange. You can set them up, and if you say two horizontal or two vertical, it'll put them side by side to each other. That's one way of going about it. That helps you, so if you want to cut maybe this flower out and put it over here, I can then use one of the selection tools. Let me move these away here. I can use one of my selection tools and kind of draw around my flower here. I'm going to do this really quickly here. Drag, and then I can use, if I want to, now once you draw a selection like this, if you want to put it over here, and even in the book talks about that, I use the move tool, again, which is the top one, which I use a lot. And then if I click and drag from one to the other, it should then go and place it on the other one. That's one way of doing it. You got, again, the two next to each other, two vertical. Easy way of doing that. Let me undo that. Oh, what's undo? Well, undo is it'll undo your operation. I didn't really want to drag it that way, so I go under Edit Undo, and it goes back to normal. Let me go back to the one-up. I don't know how to go back to one-up. That's a good question. Maybe if I drag them next to each other. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to undo my selection, okay, which is under Select, Deselect, or Command D. Next, if you don't want it to be kind of tabbed like that, and usually I don't like them tabbed if I'm going to do that, instead of going all the way over here and arranging two up and all that, what I usually do is I'll drag one outside the other. So another way of doing this, you'll notice I just click up here on the tab and I just kind of pull down, holding my left mouse and pulling down, and now I have kind of a floating one that I can have floating around. So you're not limited to having them stuck next to each other like this. If you want to see two photos next to each other, you just click on it and drag down and you'll have two of them next to each other. Last thing I want to talk about is saving. Again, to save this is under File, Save As. Okay, is what I usually use to save as. To change formats, now this is already in JPEG and it's going to stay in JPEG, but sometimes when you're working it wants to be in Photoshop. If it's in the Photoshop format, you can just go and say JPEG. Once you say JPEG, it'll save a copy of it. If it's in Photoshop already and you choose JPEG here, it's going to save it as a copy of the original Photoshop, and it'll ask you to save the Photoshop one again. So just be aware of, if you choose a different format here, the original one, it might keep and ask you to save that again as a Photoshop file. So you might have to have two. And it's okay to have multiple images as you're working. Sometimes as I'm working on a Photoshop file, I'll save version 1, version 2, version 3, in case something happens to it and I have to go back in time to a version that isn't blown up. Okay, so this hopefully gets you started with the class. And try and keep your files organized, I think, is the most important. Put things in folders. My last warning will be, I know it asks you to download these things. from the internet. Now, if you used his keys here and you use the color settings, you can't really delete them off your computer. I believe this is linked to the Photoshop file. So if I go and I delete this file or move it into my trash, oh, I'm all done, I told Photoshop to use it, it might give you an error message because this file that you downloaded and you told to use in Photoshop is actually linked to Photoshop, and if you delete it, it's most likely going to delete it out of Photoshop and you won't be able to use it. So just be aware of that. Whatever you download from him, keep it where you loaded it. Don't move it, because then it'll probably break the path to it too.